welcome in. On this episode, we sit down with Gordon Kraft-Todd, an early career researcher who received his PhD from Yale University in 2019 and is now a postdoctoral researcher at Boston College. Funny enough, Gordon is working in the morality lab there in the psychology department. Leanne Young is the director of the morality lab. And that's a lab that I used to hang around when I was an undergraduate and master's student at the school. So I didn't say I was invited to their lab meetings, but I would show up and listen. So that's a cool connection. All right, so what's this episode about? Well, we're going to get into a couple different topics, but it's mostly anchored in Gordon's work on psychology and behavior change, on using psychology to help people do good things. Prosocial behaviors is the term we use, prosocial. And so we talk about early adoption and trend setting in prosocial behavior, so how to encourage people to take on prosocial behaviors when it's still early on into the movement. So there are a lot of behaviors this might apply to. If you think of driving an electric car, still relatively new and rare, using carbon credits to offset air travel, buying clothes secondhand. Gordon and his coworkers are interested in understanding how we can encourage people to get on board with these new progressive prosocial behaviors. And they experiment with sort of subtle ways of influencing and encouraging people to do so. So you could say he's in the psychology of behavioral influence. This work crosses over quite a bit with fields like economics, behavioral economics, marketing, philosophy. It's also really an exercise in just measurement, and in some cases, measuring people's attitudes and behaviors out in the wild. So we'll talk a bit about a cool field study that he's done in partnerships with other groups in collecting the all too rare field data, real world data, on people's willingness to adopt solar panels. This was done in the northeastern United States. And so I'm going to let him sort of segue us into all that work, provide a little bit of background. He explains sort of why the strategies that he experiments with are so theoretically cool. They're steeped in this understanding of evolution, social norms. And after he does that for about 5 or 10 minutes, then we get into the details of how Gordon and his collaborators have put these evidence-based strategies to use in some really cool applied settings. So without further ado, here is Dr. Gordon Kraft-Todd.
Psychologists for a long time, since close to the beginning of the field, were interested in the idea of social norms and how people perceive social norms, like what others' expectations for them are and how that influences their behavior. And a lot of the intervention work to get people to do prosocial behaviors, like donate to charity or donate blood or do sort of pro-environmental behaviors. A lot of that research sort of leverages social norms,
Right?
But the sort of key, I don't know, maybe problem or the key piece that you need for a social norm intervention to work is that there has to be a norm. Unless you're going to lie to people, but that's we
Imagine
don't
that.
Yeah.
we can't be. Yeah. Well, we are psychologists, but right. No, we don't want to lie to people. So you've got to establish a norm.
Right. So once you have a norm, there's lots of research on how to use that sort of normative information to get people to contribute to public goods and do pro-social behaviors. But there's much less research on sort of like the early stages. So like a term that actually comes from the Everett Rogers diffusion of innovation work, but has now been in the cultural lexicon, is the phrase early adopters. And that's like technically, so he sort of subdivides the population into when do they do the new behavior, when do they adopt the innovation, to use the technical language. And so there's a sort of, he groups the first like 2.5% of people who do a new behavior, and he calls them innovators. And then the next, I don't know, 12.5% of people, I don't have the numbers quite straight, but the sort of next group is called early adopters. And these are like, these are people who, we can think about like sort of consumer technology, like iPhones, like the first people who had iPhones, are these early groups, the innovators and the early adopters. And so that's sort of the area that I'm trying to focus on, is how do these new pro-social behaviors get off the ground. And so most of my research has been focused specifically on installing residential solar panels, which is not, they're not super new, but they're still not common. I think it's the statistic from maybe 2 years ago is something like 0.3% of houses in the U.S. have residential solar.
That's not so many. Yeah, that's pretty new.
Right. It's at least not common, even if it's not, the technology wasn't invented yesterday. But
right. And I'm saying that from Eugene, Oregon. So I mean, that's saying something.
Right.
So I could see how this would be a really important question to ask when it comes to quote unquote new technologies like solar panels that are really important, but also sort of costly to adopt.
Right.
Would you describe that for us and sort of what you found? I'm thinking about the paper that you all published in Nature sometime last year.
Right. Yeah. So that was born out of I was very fortunate to collaborate with Ken Gillingham and Brian Bollinger, who are two economists. So they had this amazing program to promote residential solar installation in Connecticut. And the program was called Solarize. And
love it.
Yeah. And they organized these campaigns. They're sort of, they're economists, and so they're sort of interested in different kinds of questions than psychologists are, broadly. But so they varied some things that I won't get into details of that. But one of the things that were in common across all of these campaigns, and at the time when we wrote this paper, it had been run in 58 of the towns in Connecticut, which is about a third of the towns. So it's pretty big. I think that's in those 58 towns or something like 1.4 million people. So that's like, it had the potential to get to a lot of people. Right. So one common component of all these campaigns was that there was a person, a sort of lead community organizer, who they called a solar ambassador. And so the solar ambassadors would do all kinds of events. Like they'd go to, they'd have a table at the farmer's market. They'd have an open house where they'd find someone who has solar panels, and they'd sort of like, have people in the town come, check it out and like talk to the homeowner and say, what's it like to have solar panels? And, they'd write emails to the town through whatever lists. They'd take out ads in the newspaper, just all kinds of ways to communicate the benefits of solar. And so this is that was Brian and Ken's project, and all credit due to them, because that was a huge undertaking. And so what they did, so it had been running for a couple of years, and then they got in touch with my advisor, Dave Rand, who was at Yale at the time, is now at MIT. And Ken said, oh, well, so we're doing this big, sort of intervention to get people to install solar panels. And, we're economists, and we have a particular lens, and the sorts of questions that we think are interesting are perhaps different than the questions that psychologists might think are interesting. What do you guys think? What questions would you like to ask of our data? And this was an incredible opportunity. So I was very much on board with digging into this. And I just come across, there was a theory paper by an anthropologist named Joe Henrich, who's at Harvard now. And he had written this theory paper about the process of cultural learning. That's sort of what it was meant to be about. And he was particularly interested in how sort of religious beliefs spread. This is the context in which he's talking about this type of cultural learning. And he focuses on it's sort of the logic of why actions speak louder than words. And his explanation is sort of using this idea of actions speak louder than words to explain the transmission of particularly religious beliefs, but not exclusively. That's just the example he's using. And he talks about how, there's sort of a problem with, so people, as we learn culture, we sort of look to particular role models, usually people who are high status. And status is, lots of people have different degrees of status. So, and even in your family, you might look to your mom and dad, but then, you can have large scale, like you look to we can go to like the president, or, you look at sports figures. But this is, as humans become enculturated, they look to people who have high status, and they say, what do they do? Because a person who has high status is probably doing something right? And so they don't, and so we're not, the technical term is picky info copiers. That's Joe's term. And so he says, we want to look to these models to figure out how to be successful in life, but specifically in our culture. But it's way too complicated to know exactly, what made them successful. And so what we do is just copy everything they do, right? We just say, all right, well, Barack must have figured something out, so I'm just going to wear the same clothes and eat the same food, and that sort of thing. But this sort of presents a challenge, which is that if, and I'm just picking Barack because he's so great.
He's a great guy. He's a great guy.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Right. But if Barack knows that everyone's looking to him, and he was not such a great guy, he could say, oh, well, now I'm going to use that sort of influence to do behaviors that other people will copy and will benefit me, right? So he might. So an example of this is that, and to bring it sort of to the religious context in which Joe was talking about it, he might come up with this idea like, here's the deal, everyone. If you give me your goats, I'll do a ritual. I'll kill them and do a ritual, and you'll get reward in the afterlife.
Oh boy, I see a problem already.
And,
gosh.
Right. So now, I mean, because he's successful and everyone's looking to him and they're copying everything he does. And if he said that and people give away their goats, that's great for him, right? I mean, maybe he does the ritual, but then he eats them later, and now he's got infinite goats, and so that's great. So yeah, so that's the sort of problem. And so what Joe talks about is that So what we do is, instead of, we're sort of skeptical of words. So the economists like to say talk is cheap,
Ah.
or they talk about cheap talk. And
Mm.
so,
Mm-hmm.
your words are not necessarily a reliable signal of what of your beliefs, because you can say anything,
Right.
right? um, but if you watch what they do, then that's sort of a better signal of what they actually believe. And so I'm sorry to mix the metaphors here, or the examples, but I'm going to move from the goats to the example that Joe talks about in this paper, is specifically about mushrooms. And so he says, if, and we'll stick with Barack, like, if we're all copying Barack because we think he's great and we want to be like him, and he tells us, like, and we're out in the woods foraging, that would be pretty cool. We're out in the woods foraging with Barack, and he says, these mushrooms are not poisonous, like you can eat those. And we're likely to believe him, right? Because he's high status. But again, if he were not such a great guy, he could, tell us that poisonous mushrooms are not poisonous, and then we eat them and die, and then, he can steal all our stuff.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so, but if we see him eat a type of mushroom, then we know that he must believe that mushroom is not poisonous, because if he didn't, that is, if he knew that the mushroom was poisonous and ate it, that would be really bad for him, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the behavior, that's sort of the logic of why the behavior is a better signal of your belief than your words.
Wow. Show us the behavior, right? So whether it's with the mushrooms or with the solar panels, the idea is community organizers or ambassadors who were walking the walk, so to speak, were able to bring more people into that cause. Is that sort of the hypothesis that you gathered from reading this Joe Heinrich paper? And when the economists approached you all to join on this study, did you sort of have a moment where you thought, I wonder if
Yeah.
people who follow this with actions instead of just words will have more success? Or did that kind of arise after you all got into collaboration? It sounds like I could see the parallels now, but I wonder what it was like as that project unfolded.
Right, totally. And yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head. And now I'm realizing I went deep into the history of this thing, and
that's good TV.
more
That's hey man, any opportunity to get a little more Obama on the show.
right.
Well, he'll be on next week, but
Okay, good.
Right.
Yes. So right. Good. So coming back to the solar panels, that's exactly right. We just thought, excuse me, that an interesting question to ask here would be, well, let's see whether some of the ambassadors installed solar panels or not, and then see if that predicted how well they did at convincing other people to install solar panels. And so, fortunately, so we have these 58 towns, and these 58 ambassadors, and it wasn't quite an even split in the ambassadors who had solar panels versus didn't. And also, this is like we'd say a correlational analysis, because we didn't randomly assign the ambassadors to have solar or not.
Yes.
But we did just split the towns into two groups. One group where the ambassador had solar panels, one group where the ambassador did not. And it turned out that in the towns where the ambassador had solar panels, 63% more people installed solar, which is a pretty huge effect. And there were no other significant predictors no other sort of individual differences that you might think would influence the solar ambassador's success did. So, age, gender, political orientation, Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Boom.
So it was a big effect, and it was like the only effect.
Sure. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was a real effect. I mean, these were community organizers who, over what period of time? 2015 to 17, something like this.
This is actually 2012 to 2015.
2012 to 2015.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Um, right. I mean, I think that's sort of when you want to know the answer to a real life question, where better to look than the actual people's behaviors themselves. I'm not sure if I remember correctly, but did you all pair that sort of field experiment with some lab studies in your paper, or was there a broader collection?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's right. So partially because this was a sort of correlational design, we wanted to follow up this field study with some lab experiments that would, that we could be really confident that the causation is, if someone does the thing that they're asking you to
Mm-hmm.
do, you're more likely to do it, right? That was like the effect that we're trying to show. And so we did a series of online experiments that basically were meant to capture the field study. So we just said it was like a hypothetical vignette scenario kind of design. So we said, imagine that the town you live in has this campaign to encourage people to install solar, and part of the campaign is that there's this community organizer called the Solar Ambassador. You're now read some information about the Solar Ambassador, who is named Jonathan for no good reason. And then we gave this information, the sort of stuff that you might notice upon meeting this person. So we said he's 40 years old, he's an electrician, he's lived in the town for a long time, he is married, all this information. And then at the very end of this description, there's just one line that was the manipulation that said, and he installed solar panels through the Solarize program, or and he did not install solar panels through the Solarize program. So that was the manipulation.
Uh-huh.
And we replicate in all of these online studies, we replicate the same effect from the field studies. So if we told you that the ambassador installed solar panels versus didn't, you're more likely to say that you wouldn't. And sorry, I should say that the dependent measures that after all of this, we say, how likely would you be to install solar panels after this conversation that you've had with Jonathan? And by the way, in addition to describing Jonathan, he also says, he gives you sort of like a pitch, like, here are all the reasons why solar panels are great. So then at the end, we just have like a, Likert scale, like a 1 to 7. How likely would you be to install solar panels? 1, not at all likely. 2, slightly likely, up to 7. Definitely, I would install solar panels. And so right. And so back to the replicating the effect. So the ambassadors, when you read about an ambassador who installs solar panels, you're more likely to say that you would install solar panels too.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So that paper, I guess, shows this idea that you summarize, sort of this actions speak louder than words. Um, in this solar panel context, are there other prosocial behaviors that you and your lab or your partners are looking into with this sort of actions speak louder than words strategy?
Yeah. So we just to in those lab studies in that same paper, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just an effect in residential solar panels. So we wanted to see, did it generalize to other kinds of behaviors, and specifically, we were interested in what we're calling non-normative behaviors. So this gets back to the sort of diffusion of moral innovations language. The idea is that again, when a behavior is normative, then we sort of have tools in the behavioral interventionists toolkit to encourage people to do that behavior. But when it's not normative, that's here's like the sort of opportunity for growth or for learning. What would work? And so we thought that this actions speak louder than words intervention would encourage non-normative types of cooperation or prosocial behavior. And so we, in the final study in that paper, did almost the exact same sort of vignette that I just described, and Control H, find and replace solarize and solar panels with only buying used goods. So like, not shopping from clothes stores, but going to Salvation Army. So there were four, I'll just say there were four behaviors total. One of them was buying only used goods. Second was buying carbon offsets for flights. That's a super interesting thing that is great. Basically, in case listeners haven't heard of carbon offsets, the idea is that when you fly, there are these websites that you can go to where you can say, I want to make this journey sort of carbon neutral. So I'm flying from, if I'm coming to visit you, like I'm flying from Boston to Portland. And so then, they have this calculator that says, okay, well, you in, a commercial airliner will sort of be responsible for the burning of this much fuel. And so if you donate X amount of money, we'll plant enough trees to, take the carbon dioxide out of the air that you are putting into the air by burning the fuel. So that's like
Sure.
I'm a big fan of carbon offsets. So I'll plug it.
And that's probably something that most people haven't heard of. I don't hear that in the conversation very often.
Yeah, that's right. That's a great thing that it's especially if there's anyone who knows the airlines, that would be a really awesome corporate social responsibility thing. If when I go on to whatever JetBlue's website, there was a button that was just oh, do you want to offset your carbon emissions, because that would just make it so much easier. And
Absolutely. Yeah, that's you. Now you're thinking, man. You can't turn it off. Your brain is seeing an opportunity there. I mean, that is a puzzling question for why they haven't sort of tried to push that a little bit more.
Right.
But you were describing how you all did this very thorough job with four different examples.
Oh yeah.
Used goods, carbon offsets.
Yeah, the other two are wearing a face mask when you're sick with a cough or the flu in public. So I'm ashamed that I don't do that, but it totally makes sense. And there was a great paper that just came out recently that showed there's this beautiful image that's like burned into my brain of who gets sick on airplanes. And it's just this perfect it's like a heat map or something, and you can see the people in the aisles are the most likely to get sick, people in the middle slightly less, people in the window even less. And so it's just like, obviously people in the aisle are sort of more in the traffic of people going to the bathroom and the flight attendants. And so if someone has a cough and you're in this closed cabin for whatever 6 hours, it's might be likely that you would catch something if you're in the aisle. And so, it'd be great if there were a norm for everyone to wear face masks, but there's not.
Totally. They got to start making these things a little more fashionable. That's part of the problem. I'm sure that they do have different colors and whatnot, but I could see how it's sort of a costly behavior. Right. I would love to do that, but there are some other forces working against my doing so. I'll admit too, I haven't done. I did see a fellow grad student when he was ill wearing one of those around, and I just thought to myself, that is a conscientious dude. That is a really nice move.
Yeah, totally.
Good examples. So are all these examples sort of I forget the term you use, but they sort of non-normative prosocial behaviors in the sense that they're rare?
Right. So just to be a little more clear about the concept of normativity. So the psychologists use sort of two senses of the word normative. One is this sort of statistical frequency. So that is, if a behavior is rare, it is non-normative in the what we call the descriptive sense. So descriptively non-normative behaviors are behaviors that are rare. But the other type of normativity is called injunctive normativity, and that is sort of you can think about it as like moral normativity. So that's what people think other people should do.
I see.
Uh,
That should,
so
that
right,
should in there.
right, and so it turns out that well, so first I'll just say that all of these behaviors, including solar panels, are well, so all of them are descriptively non-normative. That is, they're all rare. Solar panels have some injunctive normativity. That is people sort of think that people should have solar panels, but certainly much less than, for example, donating to charity or donating blood or volunteering at a soup kitchen.
Hmm.
But these other behaviors are very low injunctive normativity. So we wanted to make sure that this sort of actions speak louder than words intervention would work for behaviors that are both descriptively and injunctively non-normative.
Gotcha.
Um,
Gotcha. I appreciate you breaking that down because not everybody remembers those terms from intro to psych class. And
right,
so you have these four different behaviors, and
right.
across all four of them, the same thing was the case.
Right. Oh, and I just missed. I realized that I missed the fourth of those is called Eriscaping, which is replacing your grass lawn with more sustainable ground cover like cacti or rocks or basically non grass, because grass is very water intensive.
Uh huh.
So this is especially, I think it's more of a known thing, in sort of water scarce areas like California. But I mean,
Mm-hmm.
hey,
Mm-hmm.
we're all on this spaceship Earth together, and
Right.
water is valuable to everyone. So it'd be
Right.
good if we're not just in California. Where we do.
Right. Absolutely. And yeah, that's a fascinating topic in of itself. I mean, I was being told recently from a friend about how the American grass lawn started as sort of this status symbol. Look how much water I can spend, and I don't even need to grow crops on my lawn.
Right,
Um, but not contributing to the public good there. That's
definitely.
sort of, yeah, it's sort of interesting how that's shifted.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. So then back to answer your question, then we did sort of replicate that. If you read a vignette about so instead of the town that you live in has a campaign to encourage people to install residential solar panels, the town that you live in has a campaign to encourage people to xeriscape, that is to replace your grass lawn with uh, succulents. Um, and so, and then we randomly assigned participants to read about an ambassador who either did or did not do the behavior that they're advocating for. And we do replicate the effect in these other four non-normative behaviors, such that if you read about an ambassador who did the thing, you're more likely to say that you would do it too.
mm. I love how that kind of provides some much needed data to this common aphorism, whether you want to put it actions speak louder than words, or walk the walk, don't talk the talk. I think it sort of makes it that much more powerful because that idea is out there, but it sounds like has not really been tested, at least in this way, enough. And I imagine the partners from the field study, they could take this and say to themselves, we should have community organizers or ambassadors who have solar panels themselves if we want to run an effective campaign. It sort
Right.
of gives them that piece of knowledge.
Right. So we did. So Ken is in touch with the sort of the on the ground folks. Um, and I should say that. So it wasn't just. I mean, Ken and Brian also did not do this by themselves, but they had help from. There's a Connecticut Green Bank They had help from them. They had help from an organization called Smart Power. So Ken did go back to Smart Power, who are the sort of the real boots on the ground folks, and told them the result of the study. So we hope. I mean, it certainly is practically useful, right? It seems that if I were a person organizing a campaign in this sort of grassroots way, what I take from this paper is my recruitment strategy of the community organizers should be to find the people who do the thing that we're trying to get others to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I love that. I love from this perspective of partnering with people and creating these mutually beneficial relationships. They can now take on this evidence-tested recruitment strategy, and you all do some really important, interesting work from it, and it just seems kind of like a symbiotic, beautiful mutualism all around. These partnerships, I'm seeing more and more of them now, but it's not nearly as common for how much sense they make.
Right.
Thanks for listening to this episode, everyone. And thanks to the always insightful Gordon for coming on and talking with us. If you want to hear more, Gordon has a lot of cool work. We only got to talk about this one project today, but if you're viewing this episode on the Applied Science Live website, there is a link to more work from him under this episode's tab. So please click around if you're interested and check out some of the other cool stuff he's got going on here at this intersection of psychology, marketing, and prosocial behavior.